Hello and welcome to Steel City Business UNCUT. The first episode of every month is where we dig a little bit deeper with an amazing guest in a raw, honest, largely unedited conversation. I'm James Marriott, I'm your host. I run an audio marketing business in Sheffield which is called Sound Media, and on Steel City Business UNCUT I'm joined by co-host Stephen Kenwright, who was co-founder of Rise at 7 before exiting in late 2022. The show is recorded at the awesome studios at The Curious at Castle House in the heart of Sheffield city centre. Right, let's do it. Welcome to Steel City Business and welcome to Steel City Business UNCUT, the first episode of the month where we delve a little bit deeper with an amazing guest. Let's do some introductions. I'm James Marriott. I'm very pleased to be joined by our co-host on these deep dive episodes, Stephen Kenwright. Hello.
Hello.
And it's a pleasure to introduce our guest today. I prepared this last night. So founder of Little Mesters agency and outsource marketing director, Tom Scott.
Hello.
I wanted to call you Headmester. But that's not. If it's not on your LinkedIn anymore, I'm assuming that you no longer refer to yourself as that.
Not really, no.
Fair enough. We'll get into all this.
We'll get into it.
So thank you for joining us, Tom. I know obviously you've been on a bit of a journey over the last 12, 18 months with your work and your business, which we're going to kind of delve into that. And the point of these uncut episodes is to go that bit deeper, get under the surface, and no topic is off the table, certainly in terms of the questions that we ask. You can tell us to bog off if you don't want to answer something, but that's a different matter. And, there is real minimal editing going into this. It is just an honest, raw conversation. And I am a bit lazy, so that saves me some time in terms of doing editing. So everyone's a winner in this equation. That's good. This is the first one we've done. So, Stephen, obviously it's great to have you here and have you with us. The plan is for you for a while to be co-hosting on these uncut episodes. Because I hear you're at a bit of a loose end, don't know.
Yeah.
We've got some really good guests lined up over the course of the next few months. I do think co-host is a bit of an odd phrase because kind of like host, co-host, guest. This is just a conversation. That's why we're here. We're going to have a conversation. So all those kind of labels and stuff I think are nonsense. But obviously you've had an interesting 12, 18 months of your own. You were one of the first guests of kind of the original run of this podcast when it first existed in 2019, which was in the early days of Rise at 7. Obviously, for anyone that doesn't know, you co-founded Rise at 7. And I think back then, I can't remember how many employees that you had, but I think you were sharing an office at the time. You were looking at kind of getting your own office and stuff like that. And things went fairly mad from that point for Rise. I mean, things went mad in the world because we had a pandemic a few months after that. But certainly for Rise at 7, things went really crazy. And then you exited the business last year. Mm-hmm. Before we dig into things with Tom, it kind of feels right to ask you first of all, why did you decide the time was right to step back?
Well, the purpose of the business, really, when we started the business, me and my co-founder, and we had an investor as well, was to grow it as quickly as possible and sell it. And my thought at the time was now is the time, right? So we'd kind of come out of a lot of the pandemic-y bit of the pandemic, the bits that are related to disease and stuff.
Yeah.
That was all over, or it seemed very much like it was on the decrease anyway. And the repercussions of that were just on the horizon. So we just got to that point where we'd started getting a lot of staff asking for 50 grand pay rises and those kind of things that were coming en masse.
Yeah.
And it just felt very unsustainable. So whatever was going to happen, whatever business, it doesn't matter how quickly it had grown at the time, is going to get some degree of disruption. And we'd reached the point we were trying to get to, and it was never a really long-term plan for me. So, we were kind of looking at whether we might go to market, and in the end we decided the best thing for the business, the best thing for me, and the best thing for Carrie, my co-founder, who wanted to stay in the business, was for me to be the one who left and go and pursue other things after a period of time. And let's also not play down the fact that through a pandemic, through 110 people joining the business in 2 years, that's hard work.
Yeah.
And, me and my wife had just had our son at the very beginning of Rise, and all sorts of stuff going on in my personal life as well. So it just felt like a good time actually to have a break. And I've spoken to some business owners who've said that it probably was a good time for me to have a break. So I'm not complaining about that at all.
It's not far off. Is it a year now since then?
Yeah, I officially left in November 2022.
Oh, right, so more than
so yeah, a bit more than a year, and it really took a few months to actually get an exit sorted properly, because naturally, you don't want to just kind of rip a hole in the business when you're leaving. So there's a period of time with handing stuff over and bringing in new people and succession and all that kind of thing. So it feels like I've been at home for a really long time now.
I mean, it's a fair amount of time. That's like a full year of I was going to say twiddling your thumbs, but obviously you haven't. I'm sure there's loads of stuff that you've been working on. I have to pay reference to the fact that, not least the fact that, I mean, you look completely different. Like you've clearly spent a fair amount of that time in the gym and kind of working on yourself. Yeah. And I find that interesting because I want to ask a little bit about kind of what you've been up to during that time, and I guess kind of processing that experience of founding Rise and everything that happened. When you did sit down and you had a bit of time and you kind of look back and you kind of compute and start figuring out, looking back on all the stuff that's happened, how did you feel about it all? How did you look back upon that kind of 2-3 years?
Well, the secret, by the way, is Huel, right? So I've had like so much Huel, and I kind of look back at it and I've kind of come full circle with it, because there's been periods of time when it felt very fresh, and when I'm having conversations with people who are still in the business and, people who have left quite recently. And I think you can't, again, play down how stressful that period of time, pandemic, being at home for everyone, and the sheer growth of the business, what toll that takes on lots of people, especially what Rise at 7 had at the time, which is a very young workforce. A lot of people who were living at home with their parents, who are working in the bedroom, who are living in the bedroom, who are not getting out an awful lot from, just the way that the world is at the time. I kind of felt a little bit guilty to begin with about how much actually, being in any business like that can affect people. It absolutely can, myself included. And I've kind of come round a lot more, because I've seen those people still speak to most of those people. They're doing really well, pretty much unanimously doing really well, whether that's in a career perspective or actually just, glad to have experienced at the time. Yeah. And, it's also not a unanimous experience. Like, there are so many people who have thought through the whole Rise at 7 process that this is the best thing that they've ever experienced. There's been no lowlights for some people, and there's been, fewer highlights for others. But that's kind of how a lot of these businesses go, especially when they're people businesses, and especially when, you're joining a workforce that looks completely different in 2 months' time, because you've added another 12 people or another 24 people. That completely changes a culture. So I feel pretty good about it now, and I felt pretty good about it right at the beginning, and then there was a period of time in the middle where I'm like, I hope everyone's okay. And you've got to also get over the fact that it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. It's not going to make them okay if I'm there. Yeah. Everyone's had their own experience, and they've got to kind of, hopefully see the good in that as time goes on.
It's a heck of a lifestyle change, isn't it? From that, the day-to-day that you kind of talked about, taking on staff, expanding, new clients coming on board, all the time when, there was a pandemic going on as well, but then also the fact that you've got a young child in that equation. And I'm struggling to figure out where you found time to sleep in amongst all that stuff. To go from that to suddenly almost the exact opposite, as much time as you want to spend with your family. How's that been? Because I'm thinking anything that's that big a change, there's a challenge involved in that, isn't there?
There is, yeah. My wife's sick of me. That's the first thing. She said a few times recently, "You're always here," and that's been the real downside, I think. I before I even started Rise, I had a fairly ill-fated short time at Pendragon in-house, and that's not a reflection on the company. Bad timing, really.
Yeah.
Brexit and car,
Course, yeah.
automotive dealership and all that kind of thing going on. But the reason I did that is because I wanted to be at home. I wanted to stop doing the traveling. My background is very kind of sales and client consultancy focused. So 3-4 days a week in a hotel and on the road and service station lunches and dinners and all that kind of thing. So I'd wanted to be at home for a long time. My view of the pandemic was I get to be at home a lot and this is really nice. And I get to see my son that I wouldn't have seen anywhere near as much of. Thinking about the time when my wife first got pregnant, my life would have been high-pace agency 4 days a week in a hotel versus Rise at 7 was really comparatively, family-friendly in that respect. So I think that the main thing is that's kind of I've got to a little bit further than where I wanted to get to in terms of family time. I've been really lucky with that. There's an in-between here, but that's kind of where I was aiming for because for me that was a priority all along.
Fair enough. Tom, I'm sorry we've invited you on a podcast and then not spoke to you for the first 10 minutes.
That's all right. Interesting listen.
It does. There's logic here in terms of joining these dots and why this is the first episode that we decided to record. Partly because we all know each other around this table, don't we? Me and you, Tom, we've been friends for quite a few years. We share a beleaguered love of a terrible football team, which we'll not talk about. Yeah. And obviously, we mentioned earlier, Stephen, me and you first recorded a podcast together years ago and kind of stayed in touch since then. And I know you two have talked a lot over the last few years about your kind of respective journeys and challenges along the way, which I'm sure we'll probably get into chatting about some of that stuff. So yeah, we're not deliberately ignoring you.
That's fine.
At this point, so you founded Little Mesters 2020.
Yeah, officially launched August 2020.
Tell us a little bit about your kind of career up to that point then, your background.
Well, I'd studied in the city, so I went to both universities actually. So I dropped out of one course and then went to Hallam. Couldn't find a job here. Right. So I ended up in Leeds for almost 7 years.
Okay.
At 2 different agencies. One was PR and social mix, and then I moved over to another agency called Engage that does a far broader digital mix of stuff. But all throughout it, I did social media, really. So either organic or paid, but I managed to touch on all the other stuff like app building and stuff like that. And then I met my wife, who lives in Sheffield. We wanted to come and move here. The commute to Leeds was, I'm sure people have got worse, but after a year, it started to really grate on me.
Yeah.
I requested to work from home, but this is pre-pandemic, and that was, for a lot of people, not going to happen. It didn't happen. So I found a job in Sheffield. And then, what was there? A year before the pandemic started, I think, something like that. And then that led to, obviously, the same journey as a lot of people, so furlough. Sort of sat around. I had a lot of time. My daughter had been born end of 2019, so it was actually good timing in that sense. What you were saying about that, I look back on that time as like, actually, it was quite good. And then the talk of sort of going back to work happened, and this is more a reflection on me than where I was, but I realised that I wanted to do something slightly different.
Yeah.
And then it came up with the idea of Little Mesters actually on a trip to Kellermallen Museum, my dad. So I saw the Little Mesters street and that sort of way of working with the, sort of a small amount of people coming together to make a product at the end, or just making one specific product really well.
Yeah.
And the original idea of Little Mesters was that I was going to be some sort of almost like a project manager and get the chance to work with some of the best people either in the city or further afield to sort of execute projects for people. I've forgotten about that actually, because it was a kind of I suppose it was a unique concept. I guess in a lot of ways agencies are all about building just the right teams for the right projects, aren't they? But you quite explicitly sort of saying at the beginning it was just you, and you kind of surrounded yourself with quite a few freelancers that you could bring in to deliver projects for clients. So quite a nimble, flexible way of that was the plan
working. That was the plan. Things changed. You started growing, you started taking on stuff. Kind of just talk us through stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons it didn't work out in that model, I think, I've had a lot of time to reflect on the last 18 months, but one of the reasons I think that particular way of working didn't work was the newness of the agency meant that the types of clients we had and the fees we could charge, in my opinion, weren't high enough to then hire the kind of people that I wanted to. Right. You couldn't make money out of it. So a good SEO freelancer might be £500-600 plus a day, but But if your clients are sort of on like £1.5 retainers and you've got another service to do on top of that, there's no wiggle room.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing to say is that the work kind of followed me. So I think when you start an agency on your own, you are the agency, aren't you? And then obviously your experience and your network and stuff kind of gives you obvious work that comes in. So I ended up with a lot of social work, basically. So I had a ton of content creation, content planning. And we got to a point where, very fortunately, it was either stop growing, as in like just keep it just me, or hire someone to keep on growing. And I guess going back a stage, I never really had that in my mind of like, right, okay, this is an agency that does organic social or paid social. We're going to get as big as we can get. There was no sort of very opposite of what Stephen said, where there was a plan to like grow as fast as you can get out. I just sort of started with, right, I want to create a company that I want to go to work for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which probably tells its own story in the end of how they both panned out. But yeah, and ultimately we ended up with we had 6 staff at one point, and then it changed.
I'm really curious, like if you could go back to that exact moment where you're thinking, I've got the opportunity to either I can stop growing or I can hire someone, and knowing what you know now, would you make the same decision?
I think that I would, but I think one of the lessons I learned the hardest was about hiring and the management of staff. I always don't want to say too much, but like, yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned from that process. I think that I would hire slower. The interview process and other aspects, I think I would have nailed down more, and onboarding and all sorts of stuff that I now know I should have known then, but you learn as you go along. But yeah, I think going back, I definitely would hire again. If that same scenario happened and I had this knowledge, I would just probably do it a bit slower. And in terms of work taken on, I'd be a bit more purposeful of that as well, rather than just, there comes a point where I think we just started chasing retainers. Yeah. Even if it was totally wrong for everyone. Yeah. So I think that's a problem as well.
Yeah.
We should just add, you mentioned things changed again. So you kind of got to a point where you took on staff, and then from the outside looking in, it felt like very quickly, suddenly all those staff went, and it went back to just being you. So you kind of went full circle. It did. I didn't know anything about it until I saw you mention it on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh right, wow, that's that seemed to happen very quickly. I'm guessing it didn't pan out like that.
No, not really. I'm trying to think when it all happened.
Was there a point where you kind of thought, this is not working, I've got to do something?
Yeah, we were talking about agencies and you want to sort of like the ways they are and what you enjoy about them. And I kind of realised that I'd inadvertently, and this is not to do with the people, but I'd kind of built an agency that I wasn't particularly enjoying going to work at.
Right.
And whether that be whatever it might be. And that's when I sort of realised I was a bit too far into it, and then I was trying to make positive changes to it, and then so there was a mixture of like me feeling like that, and then in about March of last year, I think, might be a bit later, but 2 clients sort of pulled the plug because they were building in-house teams, just to clarify. Yeah. They pulled the plug, and then that left me with very little room to manoeuvre. Some people had to go, which was quite an uncomfortable realisation. I sort of sat down and did all the maths, and I was like, there's no way that I can make this work. So I decided at that point, after a conversation with my wife, that it was probably best to sort of go back to just me for a number of reasons. But yeah,
I feel like most people would just fall to bits in that situation, because I want to say this in a way that doesn't come across as being like aggressive or standoffish, but you could argue that experience you could sum up as the business failing.
Yeah,
and that would destroy a lot of people. And yet you're sat here, it's only a few months later, you're sat here talking to us about it. I actually feel like you've bounced back really quite strongly in terms of you've almost gone back to your original business plan of being like a bit of a central hub, and obviously kind of doing the outsourced marketing stuff a little bit more as well. If that was me, I think I'd just want to run and hide under a rock or something and never want to be seen in public again. And yet you seem to have really taken it in your stride.
There was definitely a period of like, it was very pleasant, like the whole process of making people redundant I despised.
It's horrible.
Would never ever want to do it again.
Yeah.
Like people I really like and still talk to quite regularly, I had to do that too, and it was the build up to it and planning it was rotten. Thankfully I spoke to a lot of people, Stephen and a few others that I'm lucky enough to know, and gave me some really good advice to how to do it properly, which I think we did. And then what followed was it was a month where I essentially had about 4 people's work to do by myself, which kept me very distracted and very busy. And then when obviously some of that work was the work that was leaving sort of dropped off, I found myself for a couple of months where I was definitely, I now know I was not in a great place. I was still having to do work, but I was very much processing what had happened, and I was reluctant to talk about it. I think I do still view it as a failure. I think I could have done things a lot differently. But ultimately, yeah, I've got a mortgage and a family, and there wasn't really an awful lot of room to just bunker down and stop. So I've not been able to. Wouldn't mind a month off, but that's going to happen. And then, yeah, I think the way that it happened in terms of how I hope you looked after the team, that made it easier. I don't think there was any ill feeling there. I hope there wasn't. And some clients stayed on, so I had income coming in. Got really good accountants, which made planning for all that stuff, because there was like VAT and whatever issues to resolve as well that I'm just about done with. So there was a lot of like fallout from that you don't think of. I didn't think of either, like contracts you've taken out on the software with like 6 seats on, and you're only using one of them, but there's no way out of it. So you're just paying like 90% more than you should be for a year. Wow, yeah. But yeah, then I've settled on, what do I like doing? I like mentoring people and talking to people and being out and about and having that long, like more holistic view of marketing. So yeah, outsourced marketing director or CMO, whatever you want to call it, felt sort of natural.
Yeah. When you think about like talking about the failure of the business, like how clear in your mind was what success would have looked like actually? Like, did you have a really good picture of what you thought would be a win, or was it kind of like just sort of, that didn't feel very concrete, and actually the failure feels more real? I
think as soon as I started taking on the staff, that's when I did sit down and do some planning in terms of 1, 3, 5, 10 years down the road, what success or what the business could look like. That was meant to be like, I didn't really want to get much bigger than 10 people. I was quite keen on this sort of like small, well-run boutique, high quality agency. Yeah, and then that didn't really happen for whatever reason. But like I said, I think it was more to do with tons of learning about work we took on and other aspects. I was just trying to, for a long time, success in my head was making it like ultra profitable. Mm-hmm. And I think when I got dragged into the business, I got taken away from new business and bringing it in, and that it all just sort of compounded, and it catches up with you basically is what I'm getting at. If you're not, what you're talking about, that vision of success, if you're not if you're not doing enough to work towards it sounds really obvious when you say it out loud, but yeah, it just compounds and compounds. You can get away with it for a while, but eventually it'll come and get you.
Yeah. I think. It's really difficult to kind of square that vision and make it feel like the direction of travel rather than something really abstract. Because if I think about my agency, like I viewed it as a very binary, we either sell it or we don't sell it, because that's what it was there for. That was the purpose. So the way that I view it, from my point of view, is 1-0 I lost. Mm-hmm. It was a failure in that respect because I had one particular goal that I was going for and didn't achieve that in the way that I wanted to achieve it. But then, there were plus points as well. And, it's not always just in my view, at least, it's not a black and white, this is a failure or this is a success.
No, but I think that's what would have made my life easier, would have been to have this like, right, okay, these are, even if it's not more than one thing, but these are the 3 things we're aiming for. Here's how we're going to get there. I think it was too changing things just as and when, rather than like sticking to that's where we're going to get over there, and we're going to turn things down if we have to, or we're going to do whatever we need to do to get there. I think I've on reflection too agile, if there is such a thing.
Mm-hmm. Something that's, I guess, a little bit unique in your case, Tom, is that a lot of this, particularly the early days, is documented because we worked together to produce a podcast. It's literally called I Started an Agency, and it was you just talking about where things were at, decisions that you'd made, kind of future plans and stuff like that. And you really wanted to kind of document that in quite a raw there were points where I was almost a little bit surprised about quite how honest you were on that podcast, because some of it was stuff that was, a little bit of a peek behind the scenes. But that was something you were really keen on doing. You wanted to document it in case it helped other people, and just to be quite public facing with that. Was that helpful along the way? How do you process that side of it?
I was actually thinking about it on the way here. One of the reasons for doing that was very much for me, as like I told you while we were doing it, it was almost like therapy after sort of chatting, doing 6 episodes. It were only like 10, 15 minutes long, weren't they? They were very much segmented about one type of problem or section of the industry, stuff like that. And I've forgotten the question now. What did you actually about my podcast?
I don't know if there was a question in there, to be honest. It was just, it is a bit, that podcast, I guess, is still there. Like, people can go and listen to that and kind of learn a bit more about your journey, because things changed along the way. But I guess that kind of frames this thing about the fact that I feel like you've always been someone that's been quite honest, quite public about things.
I mean,
and I guess I've always thought about that being a strong point of yours. But with what has happened over the last 12 months, actually, is that a strong point? Is there a downside to that?
I still see it as such, because it's me being me.
Yeah.
I've always been one side of, I guess, maybe not specifically agency, but let's stick with what's at the table. Agency, sort of like owners or founders or people involved in it, that I don't like about, let's use LinkedIn, for example. In my mind, there's a lot of sort of like people not being honest. There's a better word for it than that, but there's a lot of ambiguity around what people post, and a lot of like hiding the truth. And I've always thought in my head, I never wanted to read that. I would want far more. I resonate far more with people that are like, right, okay, this is actually going really well, or this is going badly. So I know I can trust both of those reactions. That makes sense. So like, if someone is regularly saying, actually, this has been a bit crap this month, or here's the reasons this didn't work, but then all of a sudden next week, like, oh, we absolutely smashed this, I can be like, right, actually, they probably did, because they're not the ones that are just constantly chucking out pros. Because it isn't. There is always something that's not going right. There isn't an agency on planet Earth that is 100% tracking perfectly.
I think a lot of it comes down to consistency as well, right? Because it's about, you of agency owners who are posting the kind of more transparent and introspective and somewhat negative view on LinkedIn, and their staff have no idea that that's going on. And the first that they hear about a problem might actually be that the founder is sharing something that's, they're struggling, mental health, whatever it might be. And there isn't that connection, that authenticity to the business itself. And I think one thing that's always struck me about you in particular is like the way that you are on a podcast is the way that you are in the office. It's the way that you are everywhere, and that I think makes it a lot more easy for people to follow you, whether it's clients, whether it's staff, whether it's whoever, and buy in and actually make that a useful and enlightening look at things.
Yeah, and I think the other side to it is that it's a qualifier in terms of whatever works for people. So this works for me, and it also helps me get conversations and contacts and work with the kind of people that like to hear how I am. So it does help me build better relationships, because typically people will either like you or not. So there are people that like as we were talking about before, the Stephen Bartletts of the world, and that sort of level of like hyper positivity and like quotes and cliches and stuff, and people really grab hold of that, and that's fine. But those aren't the people I should work with, if that makes any sense. They should work with Stephen Bartlett and not me. Not that we're in the same world, but for me, I've always liked that. And in truth, I do got quite a few people that have commented on, especially on the sort of change from having staff to just me. There was quite a lot of people that have since been like, right, I thought those posts were really great, and like, that has actually fostered some work and some. Well, that's not what it's all about, but yeah.
I mean, arguably it's easier, isn't it? I think when you've only got to be responsible to yourself, and I sit here as someone that's in that situation. For several years now, my business has just been me, and that's a very conscious decision, because it doesn't. I don't. If I post something on LinkedIn and then I haven't got a member of staff saying, "Well, you didn't talk to me about that," I haven't got any of those concerns. But you went from one to another and then back to that original kind of thing. That thing about being honest. I'd be interested in your perspective on this as well, Stephen. Like that thing about being honest when you've got. In something like an agency, you've got two really major stakeholders there, haven't you? You've got staff who are unpredictable, how they might respond to something that you say publicly if you've not discussed it with them beforehand, or they're not aware of something. But the other is clients, isn't it? And you know, what they read into those kind of things. And it's interesting that over the last few years, as a society, we've been on a little bit of a journey in terms of how seriously we take things like mental health and people talking about how they feel about things. LinkedIn is the greatest and the worst platform for this, because so much of it is bullshit. But people that are genuinely upfront and honest. But then there's people that are very closely involved in the business that you run that can see that. And so in a way that could be a negative. How did you deal with it? Because you had a lot of staff at some point, and I can't imagine the complexities of dealing with all those different personalities and people that couldn't give a toss about kind of like how the company is publicly, and then those that get, you know, really quite easily wound up about things if you've not talked to them about it. What was that like?
It was always going to have some fallout, whatever was said, wherever it was said. And you kind of had to square the fact that you're trying to speak to a mass audience, and the natural repercussion is there's going to be someone, one of your members of staff or a few of your members of staff, one client, a few prospects. You don't hear about the prospects because they just don't call you. That never happens. But, you know, there's also clients who kind of have a reaction to a lot of things. And really, I think it comes down to whether it's true or not. So when you're saying something on a podcast, whether you're saying something, you know, on your vlog or whatever, the first and most important thing is you believe it's true, you know. And I think what Rise did very well is the way that it was presented publicly is the way that it was presented internally as well, because, you know, the founding team, the leadership team kind of viewed that as how it is, you know. And there were certainly times where we got it wrong because we didn't know all of the details on the ground level, or because you know, we hadn't heard that particular bit of information, which is normal business stuff where, you know, there's a lot of, you know, at some points 50 clients, there's 100 staff, etc. There's things that you don't know as the leadership team of the business, so you're going to make some mistakes in what you call out there. But the fact is, you cannot be all things to all people. You try and be polarizing to a degree and kind of attract the people that you think are going to be on board with this kind of stuff. And that is absolutely a spectrum. It's not all of our staff feel this way about this thing and they're all against that thing. So when you're talking about, you know, segmentation, you're talking about these kind of grouping of audiences, there's some real grey areas in every single one of those marketing audiences, never mind just your staff. Some people are going to, you know, let's talk about some of the really hot topics in marketing and in marketing agencies the last couple of years. Purpose, right? Social purpose. Some people are going to be absolutely against this particular thing that other people in your business who agree that they are, you know, they're not necessarily call themselves woke, but certainly call themselves socially conscious, they would be cool with that. That's okay. And at the same time, you know, they are vegans and they are not cool with this thing over here. There's always going to be fallout. So if you take a viewpoint, a stand, whether you put yourself out there with literally anything, someone somewhere is going to have a problem with it, whether they share it with you or not. I was in a fortunate position, I think, that people would generally share with me when they had a problem with stuff. So I would get people coming to me from within the business, I'll get clients, etc., who would let me know that something that we have said somewhere has been an issue, and then that gives us the opportunity to, you know, deal with it and actually talk to those people about, well, what was actually the intent behind that, or what is this a larger, you know, where is this going to experience this in a larger context in the coming months or whatever it might be. So I would rather be in that situation where I can deal with it. You know, complexity is good as long as you know it's there. When you think it's really simple and it's not, that's where it's tough.
Obviously now the business is back to being you. I can relate to you on this one in terms of the fact that I'm the same. And I sometimes joke with people that the thing about when your business is just yourself, you kind of like losing one client away from disaster, but winning one client away from just being overwhelmed and all the plates start crashing down. There, I guess, will inevitably come a point where you're back at that crossroads, which is, I could really do with some help. I don't know if this is something you've thought about, but how do you feel now when you think about that? when that decision comes around again, you've got to think, do I want to take on staff? Do I want to go back down that road?
I don't think I would now, which sort of contradicts what I said about it, if I could go back. But we are where we are now. We're not back, we're forward. One of my biggest reflections is that I really wish and I think I'm the kind of person that would have massively benefited from a co-founder or a business partner to some degree. I think it suits my personality, and it's not a regret, but that's something that would change my mind if, you know, a situation or someone came along where there might be an opportunity to work together from a more like 50-50 or two senior marketers type thing. I would follow that route. But the plan very much is to carry on working with freelancers, which I am kind of doing now. So I did have too much work between August and probably right now. It's been at least 2 people's work, if not 2.5, 3. But for reasons like financial and whatever, I've had to kind of do an inhumane amount of work. It's only really the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks that I've taken steps to change the work I'm doing, because I'm financially more able to make those decisions. So the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks have been quite transformational, actually, which is why the podcast is quite well timed, because I've kind of, in the process of getting rid of some of the historical work that we took on when we had staff, because it has skill sets that I don't have and I don't want. TikTok creation is one of the main ones. Like, we have a few clients that want reels and TikToks that I just I know them, I get them, I know what works. I just don't want to make them. That's the truth of it. And sort of like more like specifically content planning, I'm trying to move to a place where I'm more like, right, okay, this is the KPI, this is the goal. Right, how do we get there from more than just a social point of view? It's across marketing. But yeah, the only situation I can see myself having staff is with a business partner, I suppose, or a business, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess one of my questions that I was going to ask you is something on the lines of, would you do it again? And I kind of feel like you've sort of answered that there. I probably would start a business with staff, with someone else, but I would take some of the stuff we've already discussed, like from day one, right, it sounds so stupid, isn't it? Like, what are we actually doing here? Like, what is the end goal? Because I kind of started Little Mesters with just me, and then it became what it became. But yeah, I would really nail down on, like, you touched on sort of brand purpose as well. And I think that's one of the things that, again, looking back, I kind of let go of my own morals every now and then for things that I just, if I was working at an agency, I'd have been quite mad about it. Like, talking to, like, personally, we talked to a vape brand. I don't want to work for a vape brand. Looking back, I don't know why we did that. Crypto as well. I personally don't have any strong feelings towards crypto, in a good way, I mean. And again, we had the opportunity to potentially work on some of it, and we still explored it. And in hindsight, I'm not sure how that looked to staff, knowing that they know how that's not the kind of thing that I'd normally work on. So, did you have to compromise any of your kind of values at any point?
Not with regards to the kind of clients we might take on. I remember doing interviews, like getting prospective new staff on board, and I would usually be involved, or my co-founder would usually be involved in at least one stage of that. And a couple of my standard questions would always be, our biggest client is Boohoo Group, how do you feel about that? Because I don't want this to get to a later stage where they have a problem with that because they didn't know. And one of the other things that we did quite frequently, we had a survey when everyone joined. We asked them, what are your 5 dream brands? And then we had a league table of what is everyone in the office's dream brands to work on. And despite the fact that Rise was 75% female, Pornhub was in the top 3.
Right.
So I would always, or typically say in an interview, this is a thing we do. The whole office has been polled and they want to work with Pornhub. Do you want to work with Pornhub? Because if Pornhub call us, there's going to be 3/4 of the people in this building who are going to be celebrating. If you're not going to be one of those people celebrating, you probably shouldn't come in. And, it is less about my individual, what clients I would like to work for and what clients I would not like to work for. I had favourite clients, for sure. Some of my favourite clients of all time, like Care Fertility, you're helping people to have babies. Wonderful. Park Dean Resorts, wonderful people, but also you're making memories with your family, those kind of things, because that's they're important to me.
Yeah.
I am not a fast fashion customer, generally speaking, so it's less important to me. But what you have to do as a business owner when you've got a lot of staff is to try and keep as many people as happy as possible. And one of the difficult things is when, you've got this whole almost a generational divide in the business where you've got a lot of people who they really want to work with Boohoo. I'm like, okay. You know, who am I to say that? Because my first client in an agency was Wonga.com. I had 5 bingo sites, a poker site. I had a Russian business that wrote essays for university students who didn't want to write their own stuff. That's what I came into the world of marketing, doing work like that. And you kind of don't really, you don't always think, certainly not 2012, you didn't think, not sure I agree with this. You start to think, I've got a job I quite like. I'm working with people who seem quite cool. I'm learning a lot. These are opportunities in front of me. And it's only when you get further down the line that you've really got the opportunity to go, I agree with that or I don't agree with that. My next business, whatever it might be, am I going to be super excited to work with Russian mafia? No, I don't think I would do that. That's probably going to be off the cards.
I'm really intrigued on you asking everyone in interviews how they feel about working with, client A. Did anyone say, actually, no, I don't think it would go again? How do you compute that? Because I would kind of think you must have a huge amount of respect for anyone that says, actually, no, I don't agree with that. But then similarly, we probably can't employ you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would usually call an interview at that point. We would be having this conversation. I would very much be keen for this interview to be over the phone. Like, people aren't traveling to do this kind of stuff. It was really obvious that Rise worked with the clients it worked with because we said it everywhere as often as possible.
Fair point.
So, it was very well signposted. But there were conversations, where we had a conversation, had an interview with someone who had a problem with that particular client. And, my job there is to say, look, from a commercial point of view, this isn't going to change. This client pays us £1 million a year. And, with the best will in the world, that's not just your job. That's all of these people's jobs as well. I'm afraid, this is probably not the business for you. There's going to be another one somewhere that might be. The secret is, like, every digital marketing agency in the world has a gambling affiliate client somewhere. Under the floorboard somewhere, they've got something somewhere. Some don't. And that's a wonderful thing. I think if you are the type of person that has a very strong opinion of what kind of clients you do want to work for and what kind of clients you don't want to work for, you should absolutely seek out those agencies. They're in demand, right? Because there's a lot of people who have a particular moral standpoint that they want to stand behind.
It's kind of like the big push for agencies to be B Corps in my mind.
Yeah.
As in, I think there needs to be a frank and honest admission from some people that it's a marketing tool as well as something good to do. But yeah, I personally wouldn't have minded Little Mesters having a more public brand purpose. Again, looking back and reflecting, it would have been nice for people to go, right, they typically work with that kind of client.
Yeah.
So, another thing I think we didn't have was like that. I said the niche, isn't it? We didn't have one of those.
Mm-hmm.
You hinted in there about whatever you do next. I've got to ask you, where are you in terms of what comes next?
I am an agency guy through and through. I love agency life. I like the people. I like spending time with people. I like being able to work with people who are smarter than me. And, I have these strengths. I have all of these weaknesses, and I need a team to cover my back on a bunch of that stuff. So I also have been at home for a long time. I'm not I can work at home. I love the flexibility, right? Post-pandemic, this is a wonderful thing. But I couldn't be at home 5 days a week. So, I'm going to be in an office somewhere at least some of the time. So it's kind of like you start to narrow down this and this and this. It'll be a few more months before I'm back in the game for lots of reasons. But I know what I'm good at. I know what I like doing. And I think, like, your question to Tom earlier, would you do it again? Like, I wouldn't do a business like Rise at 7 now because I've done one. If I had never done Rise at 7, I would do it again. Yeah, absolutely. Because, there's such a learning curve. And I think one of the things that really drives me is being able to learn lots of new stuff. And when you've got that opportunity to have a business and learn, you never knew about pensions. You never knew that you needed to know this stuff.
Yeah.
It's such a fun and rewarding part, even when you're getting it wrong left, right, and centre. Because you've got some new knowledge that you didn't have before, and you're thinking, like, I'm 36. I've probably got a bit of time left to do this in the future, and next time I'll get that bit right, and I'll get a new bit wrong.
My next question was going to be, would you do it again? would you definitively rule out doing it again?
I'm not really. Oh, firstly, I'm not financially in a position where I need to start a new business with the intention of selling it.
Right.
So that's not a driver, other than arguably ego. But I can totally live without doing that. That really doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't start a new business for the main reason that I don't want to do the startup thing again. I don't want to be on my own in an office for a period of time until I hire a bunch of people. And like Tom, what really drives me is working with people who are smart experts doing their thing that have probably done it for 5 years, 10 years, that I can learn from, who've got some similar life experience, who've got a similar, not lifestyle per se, but certainly got, they're at a similar life stage, whatever. And I do feel like starting a business from scratch now, I'm going to have that period of time where I'm growing, hiring entry-level, training people to do some things that I know that there are people out there better than me at. So I'm only going to be training them to this standard, and someone else could be training them way, way beyond that. I'm not super keen on the startup thing again, really.
Fair.
I was just going to say, do you think it's one of the things that people ask me, or have asked me quite a lot, is would I take a job again? Because obviously I've now spent almost 4 years completely self-employed in one way or the other. The question was like, what do you think it's like a good thing for people to do, to go from being their own boss to being back at work? Or what's your views on that?
I think everyone's different. Yeah. Some I speak to a bunch of people who say that they are now unemployable, right? Fair enough.
That's kind of what I feel. Yeah, go on.
I think like when you've got the business, you own the business, it's like drinking from the fire hose. Everything, all of the time, from all directions. And I personally, the sort of person I am, I could just lose myself in that. I could absolutely work every single hour of the day, and I need someone to stop me and rein me in and say, this is the job that needs to be done, or for me to agree with them, this is where we need to go to, and this is, what needs to happen. And I don't need to worry about these things over here because, it's not my business. I am really personality-wise potentially a workaholic, and I need boundaries. So that's why I think being a business owner is some in theory, if you listen to LinkedIn and hustle culture and everything, I am the machine that is made for this. That's not really conducive to a family life. And
even when you had the more senior sort of stage where you had the more senior hires to look after some of the stuff, do you still feel like you had a lack of control of them boundaries or not?
There are always other frontiers. There's always something else. So like I was really lucky to hire incredible people in senior roles like Sally Rushton coming in to run strategy and Nick Hussey coming in to run operations, etc. And I felt absolutely comfortable. You've got that. Mm-hmm. You don't need me. If you do need me, I'm here. Yep. But then it's like, America's over there. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to do business in these other languages? What are we going to do about these new services, etc.? There's always something else. There's never going to be, I think, a point where you're like, everything's running the way it should be. That's not any reflection on the people that you've got in charge of things. It's like, there's always going to be new things. And, you're always kind of looking for the next opportunity, or more often than not, the next thing that's going to come and hit you around the back of the head. Like, pandemic or cost of living crisis or war or whatever it might be, being prepared for all those things. It's just like that productive paranoia. It's a good thing from a business owner's point of view, but it's also a bad thing from a work-life balance point of view.
I don't know how much time I got left, but I'm interviewing you now.
Go for it, mate.
It's just interesting because I think where our personalities differ is probably on that. Like I would not describe myself as a workaholic. I've got tons of ideas all the time. I've got a book full of ridiculous stuff that I'd like to do, but I've always been quite keen on, and again, same thing with the agency, I was quite keen on everyone having very defined levels of like, right, we get to work at between 8 and 10, we leave between 4 and 6, sometimes earlier should the wind take us. What point I'm going to get to is that on reflection, I think that your personality is probably why, and co-founders, why you ended up with the success you did. Whereas, is it your opinion that mine, which is probably a bit more not less driven, but there's less, I put less hours in the day to the business. Do you think that you can still have a successful business without that mentality? Is my question.
It's a good question.
Do you think you need it?
I don't. Again, this is firstly define success, right? Because it isn't a black and white. This is successful and this is not successful. Because successful could actually be we make this healthy margin and we've got this amount of time in our personal lives that are so fulfilling and rich that I don't need to worry about that. This is not my hobby, right? That kind of thing can be a massive success factor. And I don't think you need that personality to be able to get to that point. Mm-hmm. If you want a business that is, world renowned or whatever it might be, it probably helps to have that kind of personality, I think. But that is not the benchmark that everyone should be aiming for, in my opinion. I think time inputted is a really weird concept as well, because if I think about like the way that I would spend my time when I was running a business, I would very infrequently have my laptop open after 6 p.m.
Okay.
I would absolutely be focused mind on that particular problem and, distracted from the things I should be doing at home and that kind of thing. I'd be sat on the sofa looking like a zombie because I'm just thinking about this thing. I think it's a lot of kind of processing the day's events and processing the data and trying to get to an answer to things. And a lot of the success, I think, really comes from got to answers of things and did it or didn't do it depending on what I thought was the right thing to do and moved on to the next thing and kind of just got a lot of stuff done. But that doesn't mean like working at a laptop or on a phone or whatever 24 hours a day. So work is like this really ephemeral concept. I think it's not just you're working hard if you are typing away.
There's definitely a correlation in there between time inputted and what you get back out the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does come down to a personality thing as well. It's because, some people are planners. I'm a planner. I want to know every eventuality and I want to be prepared for it. Some people can absolutely wing it. And if that's the case, then, you might be reactive to a lot of different things, but you can move on to the next thing that's the immediate problem in front of you. And you're dealing with a lot of stuff that's coming at you pretty rapidly, whereas I'll be dealing with a lot of stuff that I think might happen. And the reality is that because I've dealt with it, it probably won't happen. So it's just a different type of work, I think.
Yeah, I think the first situation you described there was basically a lifestyle business, right? In terms of what success looks like for that type of person. And again, as you were talking, I think that's a reflection on, again, yet another thing that wasn't settled down was at times I was running a lifestyle business, trying to run it like a Rise at 7, or trying to get to where Rise at 7 was getting to. This is never going to happen if that's the way the whole business is tuned in to behave like that and act like that and work like that, when you're trying to get to a level that requires a bit more above and beyond, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I get exactly that, right? A lifestyle business is not a thing to be sniffed at, despite what LinkedIn might suggest, because, this can be a really good lifestyle. It's got lots of pros to it. And I think as long as you acknowledge that that's what you're trying to do, and likewise in the opposite end of the spectrum, like when it became almost a choice between, okay, Rise at 7 is probably not going to sell in the way that I wanted to sell, it's actually a lifestyle business then, right? If you think about, okay, well, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to run this. This is my lifestyle. Is that the lifestyle that I want? Personally, that wasn't a lifestyle that I could sustain from a mental point of view as much as anything. So that's, it's still that kind of choice. It's like the lifestyle business is designed entirely around you, and that's got to be a good thing. There's nothing wrong with being able to say, I'm going to run my business exactly how I want to run it. When the problems come up, it's like, and also I'm going to hire 200 people.
Yeah.
Do you think anyone can do it? Or what am I asking? You talked about being a planner and being a workaholic. Like, can anyone, if they work hard enough and plan enough, do it? Or is there an element of getting the timing right, a little bit of luck? You just happen to be in a room with someone who's marketing manager for that brand and you just start that conversation at the right time.
Well, it's been like 53 minutes since I've mentioned Jim Collins. You knew it was coming. Jim Collins, right, has this concept, return on luck, which I think is absolutely profound. It's not just that, or some businesses get luckier than others. Everyone gets the same amount of luck, really.
Right.
It's just about recognizing when you got lucky and making the most of it.
Yeah.
Rise at 7, incredibly lucky business. Probably no more lucky than anyone else, but we're like, that was lucky. We should really double down on that. We should do more of that. We should, make the most of this opportunity that's just fallen into our lap. When I was talking earlier about expanding across Europe, we had one client who was like, I like what you do for us in the UK. Could you do it in Germany? And we go, yeah, we'll figure that out.
Sure,
lovely client, brilliant person, bought into us to do that. And we're like, that's a lucky break. Let's make the most of it. So I think in the sense of, everyone gets a similar amount of luck, arguably. There's obviously a lot of privilege in that statement right there. But, everyone can get lucky breaks. I think, yes, anyone can do it. But I think some people are more suited to it. And I wouldn't suggest that it's the right choice for everyone. Like, whenever you see one of my real pet hates on LinkedIn, it's like everyone's like, though if it was easy, everyone would do it. And, everyone should want to start a business. I'm like, no, they shouldn't. It's not like it's not what should motivate everyone. I think some people are that person, some people aren't. And if you're not that person, that's a good thing. Recognize that as a strength.
We are running out of time. I'm going to slip back into standard podcast host mode here to ask you both really what lessons you want to share, what you've learned over your journey over the last 12, 18 months that you feel is productive to share.
That's a great question. A lot, really. I think I've covered the basis of it, really, is if you are, again, not everyone has to start a business, but if you are thinking of doing one, the advice that you read from people, the sort of the cliches and the tropes, whilst I may have been disparaging about them before, there is a reason they're cliches. There's a lot of them are true, like what is it, hire, slow, fire, fast, and all those various things, and be like very considerate about your growth. And if it's interesting you said about grabbing hold of luck, because I've also never been a prescriber of people get like you make your own luck type vibe. I do actually believe in that. Yeah. But yeah, if you can establish a niche, lean into it, it makes things 10 times easier. Make sure that you I've got so many, they're all sporadic, but they're basically all around focus and having a defined goal and not wavering from it just because something knocks you off slightly. My prediction is you'll have written a book within the next 2 years. We'll I would love to write a book. It sounds like you've still got quite a lot of stuff to compute. Yes. And it'll be really interesting when you do. We'll probably sit here and do this again at some point as well. Stephen, lessons when you look back?
I think I would definitely agree with Tom, and I'd elaborate and say, whenever you're focusing, which is absolutely the right thing to do, you just got to recognize what you're not doing as a result of that. Every decision you make is a choice to not do this other thing over here. And the key thing is to not compare yourself against someone who's doing a really good job of this thing you've decided not to do. You're always going to second guess yourself. If you're going to run a high growth business, you get used to the fact that you're going to deal with some awful clients. You're going to not fire some people you should have fired, etc., because you've got this particular path that you're on. And likewise, on the other side of things, if you're running a lifestyle business, you've made some choices to not hire all the time. And that's also not a bad thing. It's just about recognizing when I'm going to do this thing instead of this thing, I've got to just be okay with the fact that I'm not getting these other pluses, but I'm also not getting these other cons on the other side of that.
Tom, thank you. Appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you being so honest as you always are. And good luck with whatever comes next as things do unfold for you now in this kind of new iteration of what you're doing. Yeah, and if you want to be my business partner, there's like a little pitch in there for that. If anyone's interested in partnering up, we'll live podcast that somewhere along the line. Stephen, thank you. You up for coming back next month? Absolutely. Brilliant. Let's do it. Thank you, guys. Cheers. Thanks very much for listening to this episode of Steel City Business. It's been really lovely to have you with us. Now, you know how this works. If you've enjoyed it and you want in on future episodes, then just follow us on your podcast app or on YouTube. The show is very active on LinkedIn. Just search for Steel City Business and come and connect with me as well while you're at it. Big thank you to The Curious for helping make this podcast happen. There's loads more about the show at steelcity.business, and you can get in touch by emailing james@steelcity.business. And hey, if you're in business in Sheffield, then, well, why not put yourself forward as a guest for a future episode? And of course, we're always open for a good chat about how audio marketing could work for your brand. Until next time, thanks for listening.